Hello, and welcome to the Further podcast, where we explore the far reaches of the human experience, from missions to Mars to skydiving to blowing one's mind with psychoactive substances. These conversations offer insight into how these extreme experiences showcase the human spirit and just might teach us how to live our everyday lives a bit better. I'm your host, Haley Maria Duran, and I study the effects of psychedelics and other out there experiences on people's minds and brains. All right, so I'm here with Dr. Malin Uthaug, and she is one of the world's leading experts on 5-MeO-DMT, which to me is one of the most bizarre drugs out there. And she's also done some naturalistic work studying ayahuasca. She's interested in freediving. So we have a lot to get into today. So I'm quite excited. So maybe to get us started, could you tell us a bit about your work studying 5-MeO-DMT?
Yeah, so it started off around the time when I completed my master thesis. So I remember meeting up with my supervisors. We were planning the PhD theme, which was set to be solely on ayahuasca to begin with. And then my supervisor at the time, one of them, Jordi Reba, he was like, have you heard of 5-MeO? Like, it's very much an uncharted territory at this point. And he's like, maybe that could be something else that you could look into. So at that point, I have zero idea about what 5-MeO is, what it does, or anything other than it being a psychedelic, right? So I went on Google, I searched around a little bit, and I was like, wow, this is very interesting, because one of the things that excites me the most in this world is uncharted territories, and this is definitely one. So I was motivated by the fact that it was very understudied and therefore super exciting. So I jumped on the wagon, basically.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to like before any of your papers with 5 had been published. I don't really remember there being much else out there. Like, I think you had like a paper about reactivations, intermuscular versus vaporized, and yeah, some of the first studies charting out this territory.
Yeah, like there was some papers coming out by like Alan Coy Davis and Rafael Ancelada and some other folks as well. So we all started pretty much around the same time. And then the naturalistic work that I was doing added on to those, let's say, retrospective or prospective survey-based studies. So then with my work, we also added on some on-site assessment, like biomarker assessments, and later on, because I have this belief that subjective questionnaire is not enough. It's not capturing the holisticness of in experience. You know, life is a holistic experience, so research should also be one as well.
That's so true. What I think a lot of people who might not be super familiar with 5-MeO-DMT, they kind of think, oh, it's DMT, it has that name in it. But from what I've read, it seems very different from other psychedelics. What, in your like observations, researching it, watching people do it in naturalistic settings, do you think makes it special, if anything?
Yeah, like definitely in terms of like differences from, say, DMT, because they're molecularly very similar. Like 5-MeO has a additional oxygen molecule at the fifth position, which is a tiny difference, but it makes all the difference experientially. So with DMT, when people vaporize it, there's the DMT space, whereas oftentimes, even though it could also happen with 5-MeO that people have visual experiences, is mostly a whiteout, blackout, or grayout, and an enhancement of, I would say, the nervous system activity, or like whatever's going on somatically for someone will be amplified on 5-MeO. That's why I like to talk about it as like a somatic amplifier. And that gives room for people to really tap into what they may consciously or unconsciously want to repress. So they need to face and feel through things. And that's one of the missing pieces I think we have in our society today. Like, we're all emotionally constipated. People talk about there being a mental health crisis, but I believe it's an emotionally constipated crisis that we're living through. And so when people can come in contact with their emotions and feel through that, that leads to like a completion of a healing process, which I think many things in society today is hindering, like relief practices, meds like SSRIs is blocking the emotional aspect of healing. So when people ingest 5-MeO, it's like you cannot escape the volume of your emotions, and every other thing that might be like a little bit of a distraction, let's say with other psychedelics like visuals, it takes your focus in a different direction. But with 5-MeO, you're going inwards, and the volume of the inner space is turned up, and there's no running away from it. And that's what I think makes it very special and unique.
Yeah, from the experiences I've read, it seems like there's a very strong affective component where people just describe like feeling bliss or terror, and that's like the main thing that they experience in this otherwise like voidless or void-like sort of state. So, but the somatic component is interesting to me because from what I've like just heard about, sometimes people don't even remember like moving around a lot on 5-MeO DMT, so it's like, and some
Well,
people
it
don't
also,
move.
yeah, like some people move, some people are going full spastic, screaming, moving, some people are completely still. It's very, like 5-MeO DMT plus a person, and what that result is very unpredictable. Much more than any other psychedelic, I would say. And I'm not sure why that is. Like, everybody are carrying certain things in their, like, say, luggage of life. And 5-MeO, turns up the volume of your inner experience. So maybe it's opening doors that otherwise are locked, and that's why some people are going more, let's say, spastic than others. But it's really hard to gauge. And like from the work that I've been doing, like dose doesn't matter. It really is so many factors that could play a role in all of this. For example, with vaporization, inhalation technique, people might not even get enough medicine, or even though it says like, oh, they've gone for a 5 milligram vaporized dose, how much of that is actually going into their lungs and how much is going into the air, like depending on the device that's used and those types of things. So how are we sure that people are exactly getting the dose that they said they are? So especially the vaporization, you cannot really get a precise control of the dose. And with IM injection, you do.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, people might assume that injection is, like, a more extreme method to use a drug, but with 5-MeO DMT, it seems that there's, like, a slower onset time. It's less associated with reactivations and stuff like that, so,
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And you have the precise dosage control. People are getting what they're administered for sure. And another good thing about IM, especially like for research, like the mechanism and actions of psychedelics overall is not really mapped out entirely yet. There's a lot of stuff on the mind, the brain, and all that stuff, but what happens in the body and all of that. And with IM, for example, you get a longer window to study the effects. Specifically, also when it comes to EEG, with vaporization, there would be a spike in and out. People's experience are done after 15 minutes, but with IM, you can look at the entire shebang for like 60, 90 minutes. So it gives a lot more room for not only a person who might be a patient to go into their process and work through things, maybe even in a somatic therapy container, but it also allows us as researchers to look better at what happens at different time points.
Makes sense. You
Mm,
mentioned that you're interested in looking at kind of what's going on throughout the whole body.
mm.
How have you done this with five?
Yeah, so it started during my PhD, like I mentioned earlier on today. Like, there's definitely validity in subjective experience reports, but it's not going to cut the mustard entirely. So I think there's a lot of value at looking at biomarkers, different ones. I've looked at salivary cytokines. I'm very interested in hormones like stress response, as well cortisol, and all of these things are very interesting. You have other biomarkers like EEG, heart rate variability, blood pressure, all these things, the different layers of an experience and drug action. I think it's a good way forward to study and to map out the effects of psychedelics.
Makes a lot of sense because a lot of mental health conditions, they're also associated with inflammation and a
Yeah.
whole host of other like bodily problems. So, if something's really showing somewhat of a transdiagnostic action, I'm kind of hesitant with that term because it sounds like a panacea, but helpful for a variety of things.
Yeah.
Then it makes sense that it would also have a lot of effects on the body. So,
I think so too, and there's a lot of comorbidities between like bodily and mental disease, so to speak. One is kind of causing the other and the other way around, right? So there's a lot to say for the mind-body connection that I think needs to be infused more into the psychedelic research space.
yeah, that's for sure. It's not just all, oh, how mystical was your mystical experience?
No, no, because that's
Wait.
just like that caused a whole fucking pissing context in the field, I would say. Like I was work or like I was on many like underground ceremonies and people like, oh, how much of your ego was blasted into pieces, and I felt like this, and they were comparing, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? What is this? And then
Oh
the research
no.
doesn't help either, because when things started off, I call it the era of the ego dissolution inventory and the MEQ, like mystical experience questionnaire, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
there was a paper out last year by Kangas Lampi. I'm not saying it correctly, the last name, but he or she, I'm not sure, was talking about the fact that yes, there's something to be said for correlations between mystical experiences and increases in well-being. But what about like emotional breakthrough, psychological insights, and other things that I think is important, like catharsis, somatic release? Like, what other factors do you need in the alchemy of healing? You know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because, if it was just the mystical experience or just ego dissolution, there's so many experiences out there that can produce that, and it's not like they're necessarily all helpful. And what you mentioned about the, like people in a ceremony, it sounds like being like, oh, my ego dissolved so much. It's like, it reminds me of, I think I heard something about somebody saying, like, oh, well, you're gonna turn off my DMN on and off, and
Oh
that's
yeah,
gonna
default
that's
mode
gonna
network. Yeah.
fix things. Yeah,
See.
yeah, yeah. And it's like a lot of things in psychedelic science have just become like memes at this point in pop culture, and it's like
Yeah.
affecting
And I
how.
think also the fact, like you see some of the research, like clinical research on 5-MeO, they're measuring like peak experiences, mystical experience, and all of that, and like it's good as part of the equation, but it's not all. And one, I think it's important to be careful, so to not keep this narrative going, like it's been going since I started in this field, and clearly something is missing, which I think is biomarkers, body focus, mind and body connection. And I'm happy to go into this to see if I'm right or wrong. I just think it's important to continue evolving and looking beyond, because otherwise it's just going to be on repeating the same things. And what I'm scared of the most is that psychedelics are just going to be developed as the next SSRI, just disguised as psychedelic. Because if you're looking at the trend, like just mind-based processes are being targeted. Oh, just have a mystical experience and you'll be clear of your depression. But what about your lifestyle? How does that play a role in causing inflammation or not in your system? And how does that systemic inflammation impact your well-being and so on, right? So part of me has thought about the question, like, do we really need psychedelics or do we need better lifestyles?
Yeah. And I definitely think that there are times where psychedelics can kind of serve as a catalyst for people to make lifestyle changes, but in the end, it's not that they dissolve their egos so much, it's that somehow, like, some insight that they had was able to, get them to, like, go meet more people or start exercising or whatever. So I completely agree, and I think it's great that you're trying to help form new narratives in the field, because the field seems to love creating these narratives and putting the experience in a box.
Yeah, for sure. But that also goes to say, like, okay, researchers are very heady people, right? So it's natural that from the operating system of an academic is very brainy, right? So naturally the science are gonna be like that too. And I've been very nerdy all my life, but there's also been another facet of me, which is adventure and like real life experiences. So in many ways, the work that I'm doing is basically fueled by those two parts. Like I can do both and bridge the mind and the body and balance those things. And so that's why I could never just be a regular academic. Like I'm living in Egypt at the moment and I'm doing field work. I found a thing that works for me and I get to do multidisciplinary research. So it's fine.
Wow. That's cool. So it sounds like your research in a lot of ways that like direction was kind of pulled from trying to figure out how can you put these different components of yourself together. So
yeah, well, that's just like how I operate. And like when I went to Colombia to do my master's thesis, it was field work. I was very clear when I even started my master's, my PhD, like I told my supervisor, look, I'm not even going to live in Maastricht. I'm going to be in Colombia researching the real life experience. And I did the same with the PhD. I never wanted to be put into a cubicle, in a box, in an office. Like it terrifies me. And so I needed to be out and about and study the real life phenomena, which I find in the field. And then you can take inspiration from that, put it into clinical trials. And especially with 5-MeO, no clinical trials were happening until very recently. And it's been, I guess, most of the science is based off of fieldwork results and anecdotal reports and stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, the science from other psychedelic trials also played a role, but most of the information about 5 is coming from the field, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that in general, like people might be sort of skeptical of field work because, everybody, it's not like they're going in a little hospital room and the environment's controlled, the playlist is the same and all of this sort of stuff. Do you find that there's any sort of advantages to field work, both like on a research level and maybe just in your experience?
There's a lot of, like, one of the things, like, it gives a lot of flexibility, but also the flexibility, there's a little bit of a drawback in the sense that you lose control. But I also think that when the environment is too controlled, that's also a problem, because then how does that apply to a real life scenario, like a real life phenomena? And when things become too sterile, it also takes away the experience a little bit. Like definitely a sterile environment, like such as the lab, will impact, like set and setting is a thing. And also looking at what happens in ayahuasca sessions, it's a naturalistic ritual that has been going on for centuries. And that's something about that is working. And what is it about that works? That was one of the starting points for me. Like, what makes this help people compared to what we're doing in the West with like pills and stuff?
And what would you say, like, is that factor that makes ayahuasca sort of in that setting special compared
I
to
I
the
think it's
Western
the whole
approach?
package of the whole ayahuasca package. You have preparation, like the dieta, um, and also there's this element then of like cleaning your body to be able to take in the medicine and all of that. So it's the whole triad of mind, body, and spirit focus. Whereas in the West, I see mainly if you fix your mind, your beliefs, or whatever, the rest is gonna follow. But I don't believe that that is the case. So, as one of the things you mentioned in the questions, like the Cartesian split of the mind, right? The mind and the body has been chopped into two. And we need to look at us as a whole because healing is not one process, is a whole process. And that's what I think ayahuasca does really well.
So I understand that you're working sort of on a new theory that's called body set theory, and maybe that's sort of a way to kind of create a more holistic understanding of psychedelics.
Yeah, it's part of it. I can share a little bit about it. We're just about to submit the paper. But basically, body set is an extension of set and setting. And the idea came to be, it was very much influenced by my freediving experiences and living here in Egypt during the pandemic. Because really, like how you feel inside, how healthy your body is, like the ratio of inflammation in your body really played a role in, for example, my dives and other people's dives. So free divers are all about, conserving oxygen during dives and being healthy enough to perform. So I saw this parallel between peak experience and peak performance as pretty much the same thing. So peak experiences being like psychedelics and peak performance, for example, running a marathon, climbing, whatever, right? And you need to be basically in a good state internally and externally in order to pop. So this is also part of like the popcorn theory. So popcorn kernels, if there's a good, how do you say, if the temperature is high enough, the kernel will pop, right? But if it's too much, it's gonna burn. And the same thing I think applies to the psychedelic experience. There's too much, people are not gonna have a good time. Might be re-traumatizations or whatever, but you just need enough heat for the kernel to pop. So this is kind of like the analogy that made, let's say, the entry to body set. So if you can take care of your body set, I think you're better able to pop. And in a psychedelic session, that might be having a somatic release or a psychological insight or both, which is actually better than just like a psychological insight alone. So this is a little bit about that topic.
So it sounds like basically the theory is working on how can people, or like its use kind of is thinking about how can we best prepare our bodies for psychedelic or other very intense
Exactly.
experiences.
And then using biomarkers to look at what is the body set, looking at this particular moment in time. Almost like a biomarker is, for example, like a photograph of what's going on internally at that point in time. And so with ayahuasca sessions, take for example the ayahuasca diet. So people are using that to clean their body, to prepare for the medicine. So their body set is changing through that process. I would think with all the dieta, like reducing processed food, sugar, meat, all of these things, and just going plant based. That's gonna have an experience, like an impact on biomarkers for sure. And then thinking about, okay, what are people's biomarkers at the time of ingestion, and how do that play a role into forming the experience? You know, do they have, what are the ratings on the mystical experience? Do they have psychological insights? Is there emotional breakthrough going on? Are they able to surrender, to let go, or are they resisting? Like, I think there's a lot to say for a phenomenon called alesthesia. So how you feel internally is going to have an impact on how you see reality. So think about these two things. So one person is sitting on their balcony and they've slept really good. Sun is out, they're having the coffee in the morning, they're really enjoying and like, yes, I'm living my best life. And then next to them on the other balcony, if they're living in a house with two, whatever, right? There's a neighbor and they slept horribly, they're depressed. The sun is still shining, but they're having a very different experience of that day. And I think you could even go as far as to say that if I woke up one day, I felt really good and the sun is out, I would have an amazing time. But if I felt shit, that day is gonna feel like shit too. And I think this is also part of the equation when it comes to acute effects with psychedelics.
It makes a lot of sense. And I love how, like, this whole theory, it's both, like, actionable, like, there's going to be sort of clinical things people can take from it, but also, like, you're rooting it down with, like, potential biomarkers. So I like that because a lot of theories in psychedelic science, it's kind of like, all right, what does this do?
Yeah.
Like Rebus.
Yeah, I think there's a Rebus volume 2. But we can get into that at some other time. But yeah, like the somatic equivalent of Rebus
Wait,
is the thing.
Oh, so like psychologically or biologically or
I think so. Briefly, I would say so. Rebus model is about relaxing priors, right? So
yeah,
relaxing tension in the body. What's that gonna do, right? How is that gonna
yeah.
impact somebody's experience? How is that going to drive somatic releases and those bodily experiences and processes? So yeah, that's a whole nother chapter, and we probably need more time to go into that. But I'm working on it. Like there's gonna be a paper on that too, so it's coming.
Yay, I love that. I love people putting out new theories because it's like the same ideas being tested again and again. It's like, oh, we need more diversity because, you know, a lot of people are going to throw out wrong ideas, and if people are just not throwing out ideas, then we're never going to find what's actually
Yeah,
going on. So, glad
yeah.
you're working
Need
on that.
novelty. Going about the same things is just boring.
Very true, very true. Um, let's see. So, okay, I understand that you're also very into competitive freediving. How did that happen?
Oh, so I used to be incredibly scared of the depth. Like I couldn't swim where I couldn't see the bottom. Like if it was all pit like blue, I would freak out. Like I had this irrational fear that there would be like a massive sea monster. I'll be sucked down into the depths. Like I would just start having a panic attacks when I would go in. And someday during the pandemic, where was I? Yeah, I was in Fuerteventura. I just left London because I was like, Boris the twat just announced lockdowns. I'm just not gonna stay here. I'm gonna go and live my life somewhere else. I just booked a flight and came to Fuerteventura. Then one day I was running and it was along the cliffs. And I looked down at the ocean. I was like, huh, that looks cool, but I'm very scared. Like, I wonder what's down there. And like, I felt it was time to do something to get over this fear because I felt that it was limiting me. Like, I felt that my freedom was limited, constrained, basically, and I wanted my wings to fly, essentially. So in that moment, I committed to doing something about the fear. I made the decision. Then a colleague of mine told me about the Big Blue, Chris Timmerman actually. And so thanks, Chris, for getting me to freediving. And I watched it and I was like, oh my God, this looks so cool. Because initially I was like, I'm gonna do scuba diving. But I've always been very interested in, or like very motivated by doing things on my own machinery, which is why like I've done the pilgrimage. Camino de Santiago was not done on a bike. It was with my feet. And so the idea of freediving on my very own breath became a thing. So I signed up for my first course. I did it despite a lot of hardship and many moments when I just wanted to cry, give up, because I was like, this is not gonna work at all. But eventually it did. So that's basically how I got into it. It was to overcome my fear and also inspire others that if I can do it, then so can them.
That is quite the story. Because I think I saw that you have like a record in Norway for like the deepest dot. For I forget the exact record, but very yeah, very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. 2 years ago, when I competed for the first time, I set two national records. So I hold them, but now they've been beaten. But yeah, I'm working on beating them.
I mean that's quite something, you know. If you go out and try to conquer your fears, you might just set a national record. So, um,
Exactly. Exactly. And the funny thing was not really funny. I was terrified at the time, but in San Andres where the competition was at, like during training sessions there were oceanic whitetips, sharks coming to our training spot and like follow us and we had to pack up and they were still following us to shore. So that definitely how would I say, I had to redo a lot of the things that I had done previously during fear extinction because of that. Because suddenly my fear wasn't irrational anymore. Like, there's a fucking shark in these oceans and they can come wherever, right? So, going into the water, I take a risk each time. And then it's about being okay with taking that risk each time. And also trust that whenever you go in, yeah, there's a chance there's going to be sharks, but there's also a chance that everything will be fine. But it took some additional work to go through that. Yeah.
it's interesting because like the way you describe that there's like this whole element of having like your mindset sort of ready to conquer like the fear and you're just going to kind of weigh the risk and like benefits and whatever and all this stuff. Like in some ways it sounds very much like a sort of psychedelic experience in some ways. Would you
It
say
is
that there is like a psychedelic quality
definitely there.
to it?
That's what I felt for many years now, also because I had my own psychedelic experience at depth and it wasn't even very deep. 16 meters, I went into a 5-MeO DMT space. And that after that moment I was like, huh. So action, extreme sports. Again, peak performance, peak experience. Is it the same thing?
That's interesting. I mean, it makes sense because there's a lot of like cultures where, as part of like their practice to get into a mystical or peak state, they'll do something like, um, dancing or drumming and all of this, all these very physical things. So it makes sense that engaging in a sport could take you there. I still think it's surprising though that you had like a five like experience in the
Yeah.
not the bottom of the ocean, but deep underwater. Like,
Deep
oh
underwater,
man.
yeah. But also the interesting thing, I'm not the only one, right? So there's
Mm.
a lot of people that have come to me. Like I'm living in a free diving mecca in Egypt called Dahab. There's a lot of really amazing athletes, and I am surrounded by incredible people and knowledge. And I remember 3 4 years ago when this whole formation of the popcorn theory and body set came around, like I was heavily influenced by my conversations with all these incredible people. And even until this day, people are reporting to me like, oh, during my warm-up hang, when I free dive, I am tripping balls, you know? So it really seems like people are tapping into this state, flow state, mystical state, whatever it is. But I feel like there's an alignment between the mind and the body that might cause these flares of psychedelic experiences, for the lack of a better phrasing at this point. So yeah, we're gonna look into some of this stuff in research very soon. So basically assessing consciousness and well-being through freediving.
That's exciting because it's always seemed to me like a lot of the things that people report with psychedelics, the experiences and the after effects, it's like that can happen through a lot of different means. Like it can also happen with breath work, and now there's going to be another sort of comparison point of an endogenous sort of state that can take you there. So that's very cool.
Yeah. Breathwork is, I think, when you look at all the, for example, psychedelics, breathwork in parallel, and even freediving, I think you will find very similar effects. And even with like some work that I did on breathwork, even though there were low ratings of like the psychedelic experience, people still got better. And I think it's because of the phenomenon of hormesis. So you stress up to stress down. It's like exercising, you know, you're pumping up your muscles and they get stressed out, and then you rest and they grow bigger, right? The same thing would apply to breath work or psychedelics. They are, in essence, hormetics. So they stress your system, and through that, you can build resilience to future stressors, so you can cope with them better. But also another another key element of whatever it is, like breath work, freediving, like it has an impact on your mood and inflammatory markers and all of that. So it has a systemic effect, and that will drip into your well-being as well.
It makes sense that like to become more resilient to stress, you have to stress yourself out a little bit in a controlled way.
Exactly.
I saw that recently you've been into ice baths. Is that like a similar sort of thing where you're trying to have like a hermetic response?
Yeah, and it was a little bit similar to like how I got into freediving. So I never like cold at all. Like, and especially after I moved to Egypt, and I was coming from here one time going back to London because I have some work, and I was like, fuck, it's springtime in London and it's like at least below 15 degrees Celsius, right? And I didn't want to go out. And I'm Norwegian. I'm supposed to be resilient to these things by birth, right? But I'm not. And especially also living here, I got more comfortable with the heat. And then I came back to Dahab in March, and I got to know a guy. His name is Aaron Fisher, and he has an ice bath here in Dahab. He's like the ice bath man. And he became very quickly a very good friend of mine. And I started just going to his place in the morning for these sessions. And then I told him, like, hey, I want to just commit to seeing how many days in a row I can do, just to get over this lack of tolerance for the cold. And I did 35 days in a row. And then I had to stop, not because I wanted to, but because I was leaving Dahab to do a project in Canada. And then I came back now, so I'm going to restart again. But ice bath is a powerful hermetic intervention as well. And it's just another challenge out of many that I love putting my through, because it's about finding comfort and discomfort, and showing up every day requires discipline, right? So I need to show up on the days that I don't want to. And I did. Like, there were days where I would just stand outside of that ice bath and look into it, and I'm like, I don't want to go in. But I went in, and those are the moment that counts.
Yeah.
And then
pushing yourself through just what.
Yeah. And then just all these remarkable benefits that I felt like before I came to Dahab, I had started this exercise challenge and a standing split challenge. And for some reason, I tore my hamstring when during a split check.
Oh
So
god.
that was horrible. And then I came to Dahab and did these like ice baths, right? And suddenly I didn't have any hamstring pain. So the ice bath helped with that. My mood was better, my sleep was better. So all these like good stuff that came about from daily commitment to ice baths and tolerance, of
It's kind of
course.
cool how yeah,
Yeah,
created that little spiral where it's like, pushing through to do one thing and then suddenly like, oh, your hamstring hurts less and you're sleeping better, and it just shows the power of lifestyle changes. Like you don't need to go smoke 5-MeO DMT to
yeah,
reorganize how you're living.
exactly,
So,
exactly.
very cool. Um, I know it seems like you're really into doing like challenges and setting goals and that sort of thing. And I saw something called like a Habby list.
Oh,
Do
the
you want to
Habibi
describe that?
list.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Habibi list came about 4 years ago now when I first came to Dahab. So this was pandemic times, and it was right before I finished my PhD. I was working at Imperial and I was finishing my PhD at the same time with Maastricht University. So, as you can imagine, anyone undertaking a PhD, it's a mission. You get tired, and I was very tired. Plus, I had started a new job at Imperial, so it was like double stress, but not the good kind, I think. So I put a lot of things on my shoulders, and I burnt out in the process. And coming to Dahab during the pandemic really helped, because also here I was faced with, well, I was put in an environment, no academics, right? I was probably one of the few here in Dahab, but it's not an academic environment where you're like, oh, going to the office and like dealing with the research every day. No, here people actually had a life, and I saw that, there's I'm probably doing too much work and I'm not doing enough life stuff, play stuff, adventures. And maybe that's why I'm so exhausted, because my soul is not being fed the appropriate nutrition. So, how do I deal with this? So, that's when the Habibi list came to be, because one day I just sat down and I divided a paper in two. One column said work, the other one said play. And on the work column, I was just listing the things that I needed to do for work, project, the things. So this was like a per month thing. And then on the other side was just like random shit that I wanted to do, that I had always somehow wanted to do and didn't do yet. And that became my focus list for the month ahead. So I would be like laser focused on these things and not get distracted by everything else, because there's a lot of distractions in this world, and I think just having a clear focus plan is it's a game changer. And then I would just tick things off as they were completed. And at the end of the month, I would review it. Like, okay, what did I do? What went well? What didn't go so well? And I would write another list of, let's say, accomplishments. So listing accomplishments from the work column and the play column. And that became the monthly achievement list, which I then started posting on Facebook originally, just for myself. Like, this was a system that I built for myself to keep myself accountable and validate for myself that I was not just doing work. I wanted to have a life as well, and this helped me get to that point. And then people started messaging me, like, wow, I really like what you're posting, and like it's inspired me to do things on my own. And they were telling me like, oh, I love that you're sharing this, and it inspired me to do this or that. And I was like, really? So I was like, okay, if this can help my friends and family, maybe I should start posting it on Instagram, even though I like not many followers or whatever. I was like, well, that's a platform that could reach more people, and that was my goal. Like, if this can help me, my friends, my family, what about the rest? So I wanted to go to reach more people. And then it just became a tradition that every month, start of the month, I would make this work playlist. I would tick off the items as I went, and then make this achievement list at the end of the month. And it just has become a thing now. So yeah.
That's cool. I've noticed that there are like some interesting things for like the fun things like that you do. Like I think one of the challenges was like eating a testicle of a bull or something. Like it was something really out there, and I was like, wow, that is some extreme stuff. Like it's just like some of these things, it's like, wow, I would not have thought of that. I'm not adventurous.
Yeah. My friend has an affinity for eating exotic meat, and we went in Melbourne in his apartment, and he's like, "I got testicles."
Oh my
China.
god.
I was like, "Fuck yeah, let's go for it!" And like, he's the initiator of that shebang. Anyway, like, I think it started also in pandemic times. We were in Sicily having a fancy dinner, and he had sourced casu marzu, which is fly-infested cheese from Sardinia, Italy. So this white cheese just contains all these tiny little worms, and it's like a living ecosystem. And I was like, I'm never gonna eat insects in my entire life because they're nasty, right? And he spoon fed me the cheese while recording. I still have the recording, and I'm gonna post it at some point. It's hilarious. You see the fear in my eyes, and I remember like there was a worm stuck between my teeth, and it was horrible. So I was just cramping up and like doing all the resistance and not leaning into the experience or whatever. But all that to say, shadow work and therapy takes many forms.
Wow. Wow. That's an interesting way to induce a hermetic effect, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So since then, I've eaten many things, including testicles, camel liver, frog, zebra. I had bear recently in Estonia, which is delicious. So yeah.
Wow. That's that's a lot. Way to be adventurous. So I guess pulling it back to psychedelics, how do you
Mhm.
sort of picture like like what could the field do to kind of take a more holistic path? Like what can we do to do better?
I think we touched on it a little bit earlier on. I think biomarkers are important, and also understanding that one size does not fit all. So maybe leaning more into precision medicine rather than like standardized things. And also, I hope to see more of the body in research overall, in like the mind body connection, and like the triad of the mind body and spirit. I think um moving away from just looking at things through the mind and the brain, and looking at it in very different angles, many different angles. Mm, yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
It makes sense that you would come up with that after like trying to do so many like different challenges to try to live like a more holistic life. Like the research has got to
Yeah.
be more holistic. So, anything else that you think is interesting, relevant to mention?
One thing comes to mind in terms of like what makes somebody better and what doesn't. So, in preparation of like the body set theory, popcorn theory, and all the things related to it, I came across some very interesting literature on the topic of catharsis. So, what I want to say is that people that had both psychological insight and motoric discharge, which is another fancy word for somatic release, like shaking things off, as opposed to those that only had psychological insight. So the first group got better, whereas the other one got worse. So that illustrates the crucial elements of the mind and body processes being important for healing. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to, research there, so it'll be exciting to see what, data comes out. So.
100%. Like, we're only scratching the surface of this big rabbit hole. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All righty. Bye.